Welcome to the Women of SoCal Leadership Podcast. My name is Nikki Stade, and I'm excited because today's episode is just a little bit different. As you know, many of us just were at Network Conference together a few weeks ago where we had a chance to connect, to learn, to grow, and to lend our voice to important matters during the business meetings. This was such a great time to get together and just be reminded and renewed of what our calling is and how it is that God is calling us to move forward. I'm excited today because I have reached deep into the archives of our Network of Women Ministers webinars, and I have found a great nugget from one of the very first ones that we did back in 2019. This is a webinar that I think is still relevant today. And I think that you, regardless of your role in ministry, are going to glean a lot of wisdom here. This is called Harnessing Your Influence as a Woman in Ministry. And it was brought to us by Beth Backus. Now, Beth Backus is a friend of mine, and she is an amazing leader, not just in the Pacific Northwest Network, but she is also an amazing leader nationally. Beth is the development director for the National Network of Women Ministers, but she is also the lead pastor and planter of The Table, which is a multi-ethnic church in the Seattle area that serves a community with over 135 different nationalities represented. That's pretty rad. She holds a master's degree in ministry leadership from Northwest University and a doctorate in organizational leadership from Southeastern University. Beth enjoys training and equipping the next generation of ministry leaders in her development work. And I think that you're going to see that in this presentation that she did. While this is 4 years old, some of what she discusses as her current ministry is a little bit different today. But I think that the truths that you're going to hear coming from her about the importance of showing up, of being present, of asking for help, of getting further educated, of taking the next step in your calling. I think those are all still relevant topics for today. And I think if you just sit back, listen to what Beth has to say today, you're going to be really encouraged. So take a listen.
Few things. Harnessing your influence as a woman in ministry. What does that mean? My husband saw my notes across the room and he said, harassing women in ministry? What are you talking about today? But I want to talk about what does it truly mean to harness our influence as women in ministry. We all lead in different capacities, in different ways. If I had a moment to sit down with each of you one-on-one over coffee, I would probably hear some incredible stories of how God is working in you and through you to make a difference in the world around you. And all of you are women of influence. We're going to break down our time today in 3 segments. First of all, we're going to talk for a few minutes about translating reality into opportunity. And then we're going to switch and talk about a topic that I'm quite intrigued about from some of the research that I've done. And it's how to embrace risk as women. And we're going to learn what some studies have said about that. And then we're going to end our time with 5 best practices just from my 24 years in ministry that I think every woman should know. And then I really want to hear your questions. And so when I'm talking here for the next 30 minutes or so, if something comes to you, please write it down. And then you can enter it into the chat box at the bottom when it's time for questions. And we'll go that way. I grew up in Ohio, in rural Ohio, and we had horses when I was growing up. And I remember one day I was out riding this horse that my brother was working on, and I lost grip of the harness. And the moment I lost the grip of the harness, that horse took off like a wild possessed thing and bucked me off. And so I remember my brother screaming, grab the reins, harness the reins. And when I did, then the horse was back into control and I could get it to move and go where I wanted it to go. And that really reminds me of life in ministry. How many know that ministry can be a wild ride, can it? And sometimes we need to pray and ask God, focus me, show me where you want me to make the most impact and where you want me to be. And so we're going to talk about what does that look like for all of us to harness the influence that God has given us. The first area I want to talk about is translating reality into opportunity. I look at being a woman in ministry as kind of a two-sided coin. On one side, you have some realities, and some of those realities are kind of harsh realities. And I'm going to give you some statistics in just a moment to talk about that. But then on the other side of the coin are opportunities. And I believe that a wise woman will be aware of the realities, but also focus on the opportunities. And that's what I want to do this morning, is take a look at some of the realities that we're facing as women in ministry. The first one is this, and here's some stats nationwide. Can everybody see everything? Okay, nod, yeah, great. In the Assemblies of God, if you didn't know, this is kind of fascinating to me, but 24% of all ministers in the United States are women. And in 2014, did you know that 60% of all newly credentialed ministers were women? So pretty amazing. There is a lot of women are answering the call to ministry right now. So it's really an exciting time to be a woman in ministry. However, another reality, only 5% of our women ministers are serving as lead pastors across the country. And in our network in the Northwest, it's 0.4%, very small. The typical U.S. congregation draws an adult crowd that's 61% female and 39% male, and that gender gap shows up in every category. On any given Sunday, there are 13 million more adult women than men in our churches in America, and midweek services often draw 70 to 80% female participants. Richard Hammer, he's the legal representation for the Assemblies of God, brilliant mind. I read an article of his that reports that the wage gap for women in ministry used to be 24%. What does that mean? That means women were getting paid 24% less than their male ministry colleagues for doing the same amount of work. He said that gap is shrinking, so that's good news, but it is still at 15%. So most women are still getting paid about 15% less than men in ministry. Only 4% of women are represented in presbytery positions nationwide, and this is really crucial. We're going to come back to this one later. Did you know that only 3 women serve in executive leadership roles in the Assemblies of God in our districts, networks? We call ours a network as well. And those are amazing women that are serving in Hispanic districts. But none of our geographical districts, Southern Cal and us in the Northwest, we would be considered a geographical district. None of us have had a woman in the top executive roles. And by executive role, I mean superintendent, assistant superintendent, or secretary treasurer. So that's a reality. Last year, if you didn't know, a woman for the very first time was appointed to serve as a general counsel executive officer. Yes, Donna Barrett, which happens to be, fun fact, used to be my youth pastor in Ohio when I was growing up for a very short season. So that was kind of cool to see that happen. Now, she will be voted in this August in Orlando at General Counsel, and we still do need to ratify and vote her in. If she gets voted in, she will be the very first female to serve in the executive officer role in 100 years, in over 100 years in the Assemblies of God. Pretty amazing stuff. So this year, fun fact about our network is for the first time in 100 years, we're actually celebrating our centennial this year in the Northwest Ministry Network. And we are going to have our very first vote that includes women on the executive presbytery. If you don't know what the presbytery means, presbytery is that group of people that make the high-level decisions for your network in the Assemblies of God. So that's really crucial. And so those are some of the realities that we are facing as women. And let's be honest, some of those are really encouraging, and some of those are, ooh, we have a long way to go. We have a lot of work to do as women in ministry of having more diversity. And I will say that one thing that is helping is the current research that's going on out there on the strength that women bring to teams. I have a book called Better Together. It's not a Christian book, but it provides data and research that shows that teams that have 30% women represented on them are more successful. They're more successful financially, they make better decisions. And so there's some really strong research going on around the country that is really pointing and getting people to think about being more inclusive of women, and especially women in ministry. So we looked at the realities. So let's take a few moments and look at some of the opportunities and reframe some of the opportunities for us as women in ministry. So the first one, kind of an obvious no-brainer one, but it's pastoring. And here's what I hear across the nation. When I talk to superintendents from Ohio, even your superintendent, I hear this. We would hire women to be pastors, but we have never received resumes for women. Now, if you didn't know the history of the Assemblies of God, some of our first church planters were women. Some of our first strongest pastors were women in the Assemblies of God. And then we adopted a lot more of a strong male-dominated governance, and that actually pushed women out of the way a little bit, because it actually included language in our bylaws that restricted women from serving on as elders and as board members. But there is a great opportunity for women to apply for lead pastor positions. Just in our network a few weeks ago, a dear friend of mine named Kathy applied for an open church and they voted her in. And so there are some great opportunities, especially since there are a lot of pastors that are coming to that retirement age. And so it's a great time. So if you have ever had a stirring in your heart that, hey, pastoring is for me, that's something I'd be interested in doing, I encourage you to reach out to your network and submit a resume when open churches become open. The next one I want to talk about is church planting. Church planting is where I got my start. And I was just at the CMN Church Plant Conference last week in Dallas. There were over 1,500 pastors there, and Adelita Garza, who is a powerful woman of God, spoke, and it was just so amazing. Church planting is an amazing opportunity for women in ministry. And I will say this, when I first started on a church plant team, the need was for a children's pastor. And can I just tell you, I did not feel a specific call to be a children's pastor, but that is where the need was. So I said yes, and I stepped in, and I stepped into this role to be a children's pastor, and it grew to, we were reaching anywhere between 500 and 1,000 children every single week. And can I tell you, everything that I learned about ministry, I learned from being a children's pastor, because you learn how to recruit volunteers and build a team. I had to learn how to budget and pay for those kids to have meals every single week. For one of our programs, we fed them every Saturday. So I encourage you, sometimes when we say yes to something on a church plant team, it might not be your sweet spot, but you will have an incredible, incredible learning experience. So don't say no to opportunities too quickly, because you never know what God can use. I look back on those years of being a children's pastor, and I look at them as some of the most fruitful years as far as developing me as a pastor that I've ever had in ministry. So those 4 years in ministry as a children's pastor were really amazing, but I was part of a church plant team. When you're part of a church plant team, guess what? You get an opportunity to be exposed to all different types of ministry. I've led worship, I've helped with youth ministry, I've plunged toilets, I've driven the church van, all of those things you can do as a church planter. So let's move on and look at writing. I know some amazing women of God who God is using their writing skills. And so I encourage you to find your voice. If you enjoy writing, if you enjoy reading, you typically enjoy writing. Many of you know our own Jody Dietrich from the Northwest Ministry Network. She's written the book, The Jesus-Hearted Woman. If you haven't read it, I would highly suggest it, because it's a powerful book that speaks to women, especially women called to ministry. And I have been amazed to sit back and watch how God has opened doors. Jody has now traveled all over the world because of the avenue of writing. So if God has called you to write, write. Go for it. The next one I want to talk about is leadership within the Assemblies of God. Now, we talked for a few moments about what that looks like, how we have little representation, and the reality is our leadership has a gap, and they're looking for women. Okay, they're looking for women to serve as presbyters, women to serve in all types of capacities in your network. And so here's the 3 G's that I'd like to give you. The first one is get ordained. Raise your hand if you're ordained. If you're not ordained, I can, yeah, Nikki says she's really close. I encourage you, do whatever it takes to get ordained. I remember I was licensed for a really long time. I want to say it was like 8 years or so. And I remember my boss said to me one day, hey, why don't you get ordained? And I said, well, you're the first person to ask me to do that. Since I've been ordained, I was voted in at the national level to serve as the under 40. This was several years ago, before I was 40. To serve as a general presbyter under 40. That would have never happened unless I was ordained. So do whatever it takes. I took the Berean classes, the easy, quick, cheap way to go. That's how I started out. I know I'm working on my doctorate now, and that sounds all big and fancy, but I just started with the Berean just to get my foot in the door. The second one is go to all of your area meetings. I don't know if you call yours presbytery meetings or area meetings. We call ours both. But those meetings that they have is where elections take place. I was asked to speak at an area meeting just about a month ago, and I showed up and there were over 20 pastors there and not one single woman was represented there. And that was a day that they voted on some very crucial executive presbytery positions, and there were no women in the room to vote. So I tell women, go to all of your meetings, show up, find your place at the leadership table. And the last one is gain knowledge about how your network business meetings are run, especially at your network conference. We call ours network conference. You might call yours, is that what you call yours? Good. I want to make sure the language I'm using is correct. But what I've noticed in the past, especially with some women, is they'll show up to those, and then during the business session, they'll say, hey, let's go out to eat or grab coffee or go shopping, and they miss this crucial opportunity to have a voice in the voting process. So I encourage you to even brush up on Robert's Rules of Order, know when you can bring something to the microphone, know the proper way to talk about a resolution if it comes forward. The only one of the reasons that we are having a resolution go forward this year for our network to include a woman is because I met one of your executive presbyters last year on a trip to Southern California. And I brought that back to our leadership and I said, hey, we need to write a resolution. And do you want to do it, or would you like me to? They said, let's collaborate. So we did that. Well, if I wasn't aware of the process, we could still be stalled. So you can make a big difference by just gaining understanding and knowledge of how the system works. Let's look at the next one, missions. There are so many opportunities here in the US and abroad to serve in missions. We have Chi Alpha that serves here as a major US missions proponent. There's even ways to plant churches being a US missionary that opens up your funding opportunities, which is really exciting. And then overseas, it used to be that you just had to be a career missionary. There's so many levels. You can go for a year as a missionary associate. You can go for an extended amount of time as a MAPS worker. You can kind of explore those options. So I encourage women, when you think of opportunities in ministry, if you don't see doors opening where you're currently at, maybe God has a opportunity for you through local or global missions. Next, professors. I don't know if you know this, but there are certain universities that are really looking for strong women professors. In fact, I was just on a search team here at Northwest University in Kirkland, Washington, and they really want to find a woman to fill the new position. And gratefully, we had a few strong women apply, and the process is still going on. But what I've heard over and over in the world of academia is that sometimes there's just not enough women. We have women coming to train at our Bible colleges, our universities, but they don't have strong role models. So I encourage you to consider getting higher education. I am an adjunct professor at Northwest University, and I have the opportunity to mentor and speak into the lives of other women there, because there is currently only one woman who serves in the College of Ministry right now. And so it's really an opportunity that, honestly, when I was starting out in ministry, I never would have thought of teaching as even at the university level as being something I was interested in, but it's really a way to make an influence on the next generation of ministers. Next, let's look at entrepreneurs. This is kind of an open field. I do think there are a lot of women who are wired this way. If you look and see what Christine Kane is doing nationwide, around the world actually, with sex trafficking, there are many opportunities for you if God has planted something in your heart, just to say, hey, I'm going to go for that. And if I don't see a ministry where I can plug in, maybe God's putting something on your heart to start something. So keep that in mind as well. So I believe it's one of the best times in history to be a woman in ministry. And I just want to encourage us not to get stuck looking at some of the harsh realities, but look at the opportunities. I really believe, like Jesus said, the harvest is ripe and the workers are few. So it's an exciting time to be in ministry. Next, I want to take a few moments to look at the risk factor, that we could learn to embrace risk and not resist it. There was an experiment done. Dr. Therese Houston wrote a book called How Women Decide. If you haven't had a chance to read the book, I would highly recommend it. She talks in the book about, she's a cognitive scientist, and she talks about a study that they did. They took little girls and little boys to a park with their parents, and they observed the little girls and the little boys going down a fireman pole. You know those poles where you slide down? And they made observations and did research on the study. And here's what they found. They found when little Johnny was at the top of the fireman pole, all the parents were telling him, Johnny, come on, you can do it. Come on, go, go, go. And when little Susie's turn was to go down the fireman pole, they told her, oh, Susie, it's okay. Hey, do you want me to help you? Here, I can hold you. They told Susie, you know, Susie, if you don't want to do it, you can change your mind and come back down. And so what does that teach us about how gender is related to risk? Men are typically taught to embrace risk, while women are taught to resist it. And here's the thing, living by faith is the foundation for our lives in ministry, is it not? I mean, Hebrews tells us that without faith, it is impossible to please God. And so taking a step of faith is that equivalent of going down the fireman pole. And it involves a level of risk, no matter what you're doing in ministry. So we can't be in ministry without learning how to embrace some type of risk. And Jesus told Peter to get out of the boat. And how many know that that sounds like a little risky to me? And yet Peter did it. So I want to talk just a few areas, helpful tips to help us as women embrace risk. First of all, I think just self-awareness, that really from a young age that maybe we've been taught to maybe shy away from risk and not embrace it as much. I think just knowing that is a huge step, and being aware of your own reactions when you're getting ready to or feel an urge to do something that would be high risk, to just recognize, oh, maybe am I resisting this for the right reasons, or there's some wrong reasons here. So the first one is kind of an obvious one to talk to about with women who I know love Jesus. But the first one is cultivate your relationship with Jesus. Why do I say that? When I know Jesus is in the boat with me and I know that he's told me to step out on the water, I can do that because I know that I've had that intimate time with him and that I've heard his voice. And so staying close to Jesus, I believe, is really the best thing we can do, because how many know when you've heard from God that you will risk anything if you know you've heard from God, right? That we can step out in obedience. The next one is learn to listen to the sacred echoes. If you know Ruth Haley Barton, who wrote the book Sacred Rhythms, she talks about sacred echoes in our lives. Some of those are hearing God through his word. Some of those are, how am I wired? What are my natural desires? A sacred echo could be, what are others saying about me? What do other people see in me that maybe I haven't seen in myself? And the last one would be looking at the needs around you. What are the felt needs, and what is God asking me to do about them? Sometimes if we stop and learn to listen to the sacred echoes, we can hear God saying, go for it in all of those areas. And it really builds our sense of confidence. And we'll talk more about confidence later. Don't be a lonely leader. You know, the Word of God teaches us that there is wisdom in counsel. And I would say probably the first 8 years or so in ministry, I was a lonely leader. I was so focused on ministry. I didn't have a lot of peer friends. I didn't have a lot of mentors in my life. And can I tell you, the decisions that I've made alone are the decisions that I've regretted in life. And so I encourage you not to be a lonely leader. Find mentors, find coaches, find those spiritual, I call them spiritual mamas, spiritual mamas in your life. How many know we need some spiritual mamas in our lives that we can go to and say, hey, this is what I feel like God's wanting me to do. What do you think? And test the waters. So don't be a lonely leader. Lean into a network of relationships. Women, we know this. We are designed for relationship, and we are designed for networking. So make sure that you're networking in the right ways. And the last one is do it afraid. I used to listen to Joyce Meyer back in the day, and she's still an amazing woman, but I will never forget her saying, hey, when God's called you to do something, you need to do it afraid. And I really believe that there's a myth that we need to be these fearless women, and really we just need to focus on our fear less. The fear doesn't go away. Okay, when I've had women come up to me and say, you're just so bold, you're just so fearless, and I laugh at them and I say, oh, if you only knew how sick to my stomach I felt when I got up to preach at that church or step out and start that ministry, how many doubts and wonder I had. But we can step out and choose to focus on our fear less, and being fearless is just a myth. So I want to dive into what I like to talk about as kind of my 5 best practices that I believe we should all know as women in ministry. The first one is do the hard things, okay? I want to read a quote from the book, The Dream Giver. If you haven't read it, Bruce Wilkinson, it's a powerful, short little read. Bruce sits down with a man who has a PhD in leadership development, and he asks him, based on your research, what is the most important secret to developing world-class leaders? And this is what the answer was. The single best way to develop leaders is to take people out of their safe environments and away from the people that they know and throw them into a new arena that they know little about. Way over their head, preferably. In fact, the more demanding their challenges, the more pressure and risk they face, the more likely a dynamic leader will emerge. Wow. Now, I'm just going to tell you, when I read that, it kind of just made me cringe a little bit, because I don't like being thrown into the deep end of the water. I like a plan. I like to know what I'm doing. One of the research between how men and women process things differently, if a man looks at a job description and he sees that, oh, I think I'm probably qualified enough to do about 70% of what's on this list, he will apply for the job. Now, women, do you know what we do? Most of you know where I'm going with this. We look at the job description, and unless we have every box checked and 100%, we don't want to step out for the job. Here's the reality. Most men have figured out the secret that you learn as you go. And you only learn by doing the hard things. And so I encourage you, whatever God is calling you to do, whether it's applying for a degree, whether it's stepping out to put your resume in for a ministry position that you think just is so impossible, writing a book, preaching a sermon, starting a ministry, do the hard things. The next one is kind of interesting to talk to a group of women, but know what the Bible really says about women. I don't know about your experience, but I've been a little bit surprised over the years. I grew up in a kind of eclectic group of churches, but I started going to an AG church when I was about 16 years old. And I didn't know what the Bible said about women. I was really taught more of a complementarian theology. If you're not familiar with that term, complementarian means that women can serve in certain roles, but not all roles. Okay. And then egalitarians believe that there's no restriction in the Bible, that women can serve at any pastoral role. By the way, that's the Assemblies of God belief. We are egalitarians, have been for 100 years. We've been ordaining women from the beginning. And so I remember when I was in high school and I wanted to start a Bible study. And so I started this Bible study at my public school, and there were like 30 people coming to it. A revival was happening. People were getting saved. And this young lady came up to me one day and she said, "Hey, my pastor heard about what's going on here." And I was really excited. I said, "Really? Yeah, what did he have to say?" And her response broke my heart. She said, "Well, he said a woman shouldn't be teaching." And I was confused. I hadn't been taught what the Bible said about women. I hadn't been taught any of this theology. And I have found that women over the years, we haven't taken the time to study and talk about what the Bible really says. So a few things. If you want an easy read, God's Women Then and Now by Deborah Gill and Barbara Kavanaugh is a great read. Very simple. It's not a very big book. If you're kind of a nerd and a geek like me, and you want to hear see the thickness of this one's called Man and Woman, One in Christ by Philip Payne. And Philip Payne, this is fascinating. He started his research to prove that women should not be in leadership roles. And he wanted to take a theological approach and dig into the scriptures. And what he found was exactly the opposite. He found that Jesus never restricted women. When he dug into the original language of what Paul said, he realized what Paul said about women being silent wasn't a universal, hey, all women be silent. It was to be taken in context. So I encourage you to at least have a basic understanding of what the Bible says about women. And here's the deal, ladies. I don't like to argue with people. So if people come to me and say, "Hey, I don't believe, that you should be speaking or preaching," which has happened before, I tell them, well, I understand that there's varying views on women in ministry. I happen to belong to the Assemblies of God, and we affirm women in any capacity in ministry, and so that's where I serve. And I understand there are other beliefs out there, and if you are more comfortable with those beliefs, you can go join that church down the street. I just think it's really important for us as women to know some of the basics. If you're interested, on our website, and I can see if maybe even Nikki, I don't know if you can find the link to put in the chat box or share with the women later, but if you go to nwministry.com and the Network of Women Ministers, there is a link on a video series. It's 3 video series called What the Bible Really Says About Women. And I interview a man who is a world-renowned theologian, and he breaks down the really hard passages in scripture. It's really fascinating. And sometimes I've actually just sent the link to men who have questions, and even women who have questions, and say, "Hey, check out this series." And so that's an option for you. Next, here's something I've learned just probably in the past 7-8 years, that we need to make friends with the guys in ministry and that we are going to have to be the ones to initiate. They won't initiate. When I was working on my master's in ministry, I was the only woman in a group of about, I think, 12 guys in this class. And every day they would get up for lunch and they would all go out for lunch together and leave me in the dust. And these were guys I knew. Some of them were presbyters, guys I would consider, colleagues. And I realized that on the second or third day, I had to say, hey guys, where are we going to lunch today? And they said, oh yeah, of course, we'd love to have you. But guys aren't going to initiate out of the perception of them not wanting to seem like they are pursuing. And I had to come to that reality. Now, in my role here at the Northwest Ministry Network, I sit on a leadership team with 6 other men. I'm the only woman. And I have found if I want to get together with one of the guys, I need to initiate that. They're typically not going to initiate that. Now, here's the cool thing that's happened. Since the Lord has prompted me to build strong friendships with the men that I work with over the years, those are the guys that call me to preach at their churches. Those are the guys that I can call when I'm facing a difficult leadership decision, and I can call them and say, hey, this is what I'm dealing with. What do you think? Give me some feedback. So I have really benefited by building relationships with guys. Now, if you notice, the next time you're in a mixed gender meeting, look at what happens, because typically this is what happens. The women will cluster with the women and the men will cluster with the men. So when I walk into a room, I look around, and when I see that happening, I'm very intentional to change that up. In fact, just a few months ago, I was in a meeting, and at lunchtime, all the ladies rushed to a table together, and they said, hey, Beth, come sit with us. And at the risk of seeming rude, I said, you know what, ladies, I'm actually going to sit over here. There's some guys I want to talk to about some things. I have to work really hard at it because we've kind of been taught as a culture to segregate ourselves. And it really hurts us, because if we want to work together, we've got to learn how to have basic communication and relationship together. So I encourage you, the next time you're in a room with guys and ladies, look around and make an effort to build strong relationships with the guys. The next one is seek out men to mentor you, but please don't use that label. I've noticed in the past that if I say to a man, would you like to mentor me? It's just like these walls go up, because there's certain expectations when we hear that word mentor, that it's going to be close, one-on-one, awkward, maybe inappropriate. So I don't do that. This is what I do. If I see a strong leader and I think, wow, he's doing some amazing things, I give him a call, drop him an email and say, hey, would you be able to take 20 minutes with me? I have some specific questions that I'd like to pick your brain about how it's going for you in your ministry and even your leadership. I have never once had a man turn me down for that. And you can do it on Zoom like this, which is totally appropriate and a great comfortable place. If you notice behind me, you'll see that all of our doors have windows on them. So I have lots of meetings here in my office, and there's windows, and it's appropriate to do that. So seek out men to mentor you. And this is the reason why. Oftentimes, I am facing a challenge, and a lot of the women that I know have not faced that challenge yet, because they just haven't had the experience. So oftentimes I'll have to go and ask a guy, hey, when you face this, what have you done? How have you navigated it? So I encourage you. I've grown a lot. I've made some really crucial decisions that if I would, especially one several years ago, I was ready to make a decision. And at the last minute, the Lord prompted me, call this guy and ask him what he thinks. He gave me a perspective that I had not even considered before. And it was really powerful. I changed the course of my decision making. I followed his advice, and it was one of those game changer type of life big decisions. And I'm here today in large part because of that conversation. So seek out men to mentor you. Just don't use the label. Be a little sneaky about it. And the last one is this: focus on your call, not your cause. I had a woman who was a lead pastor in Minneapolis. She was the first woman to mentor me in ministry. And one day I was talking to her and she said, Beth, focus on your call and not a cause. And can I tell you, that has saved me so much heartache over the years. It has kept my focus on Jesus. It's kept me sweet, I hope. Nobody wants to work with angry, bitter women, right? And we all know those women who can kind of come across that way in ways that maybe are off-putting. And so I have tried to, and another piece of advice she gave me at the time was that change comes from the inside. We will never change an organization from the outer skirts or outer perimeters. The closer you can get to the leadership table, and that's why I encouraged you earlier to get ordained, get higher level education if you can, show up to your meetings. When we get on the inside, that's where true change happens. So focus on your call, not your cause. Pick your battles wisely. I work on a team with all men. Can I just tell you, if I nitpicked every time they referred to pastors as he or those little things, nobody would want me on that team. But can I tell you, when I'm silent and I pick my battles strategically, when I do speak up, my voice is heard and listened to and respected. It's not, oh, here she goes again. It's, oh, Beth noticed something. And I have had the opportunity to really promote and advocate for women because I've been really, really careful about what I say and when I say it and the frequency. I want to close our time by sharing this last thing. I do a 9-month intensive leadership journey for women in ministry here in the Northwest. We take 12 women through a 9-month program. We meet 3 times all day here at the network office. Then we take a 3-day trip to California. And I did a formal program evaluation last year. And I want to share some of the results with you. 87% of the women received a tangible promotion in ministry after they went through this training. 75% identified in an open field question that confidence was the major area of growth in their ability to lead. And 100% of them launched a new ministry after going through the program together. And the thing that the Lord really put on my heart to share with all of you today is the scripture in Hebrews 10:35. Do not throw away your confidence, for it will be richly rewarded. Ladies, I know it can be discouraging sometimes. It can be isolating sometimes, but don't throw away your confidence. God has called you. God has a plan for you. You might be in the midst of a wilderness experience. I spent 8 years at this office in an administration role. Can I tell you, it felt like a wilderness season to me. But God has called you.
I told you that was awesome, right? Some of the statistics that Beth mentioned are a little outdated. For instance, we are now up to 27% of our credentialed ministers who are women. And there are other great statistics as well. For instance, just this year in our SoCal network, we now have installed an additional 3 or 4 female lead pastors. And that's really exciting. But I want to encourage you, whether you are feeling a little bit invisible or you're trying to figure out what it is that God's calling you to do. Maybe you are a pastor's wife or a minister who is serving women in your local church, or maybe you haven't even gotten credentials and you're just trying to figure out how to be a better Bible study teacher. I want to encourage you that here at Women of SoCal, we see you and we care about you and we want to offer you resources to help you along in your journey. We have so many awesome things that we have coming up in this next year. We're just getting started. But I also want to tell you about the Elevate Leadership Network, which I think is going to be an awesome resource that is going to help equip you and connect you with women from around the country and around the world who are following along their call as well.
Elevate Leadership Network is a community of women in ministry, and we really represent all different capacities of leaders and diverse generations and ethnicities. This is going to be an interactive platform where we can ask questions, find mentors, and develop skills through training and growing our leadership so that we can be effective in bringing the hope of Jesus to the world.
This online community will connect women in ministry to a safe space to share about ministry experiences and challenges. We want to help you steward your calling and spiritual gifts well by giving you exclusive leadership development resources. So whether you're looking to start mentoring the next generation of ministers, or if you're just starting out in ministry, Elevate Leadership Network is for you.
This community of called women will connect us nationally and globally in a way that's really never been done before. It's a place to cultivate our gifts through ongoing leadership development, like masterclasses that will be taught by experienced pastors, or be a part of peer mentoring groups that give relational support and space to share resources.
We believe leadership development should be accessible and affordable. That's why we're offering Elevate Leadership Network for the low cost of $20 per month. So if you're looking to join a community where you can learn, grow, and network, we can't wait to meet you there.
This is something that our national office is putting out there as a source of resource and training. It's going to offer all kinds of avenues, whether it is watching webinars similar to what we just experienced, or being in a live mastermind class, or being involved in a forum, a community where you can connect with other women. This is something that is going to be really valuable. And I'll put the description down in the comments below, but I want you to get plugged in if this is something that you're trying to figure out your next steps in your ministry journey. Well, friends, thank you for joining us for this episode of the Women of SoCal Leadership Podcast. I hope to connect with you in person or online at Women of SoCal AG, or you can check us out at our website, women.socalnetwork.org. Until next time, I am praying for you. Our team is here to resource you and help you and encourage you. And I can't wait to see what God is going to do next in your life.